Greetings, dear reader. I am Erik Eldritch, and today we'll be reading my book, Don't Worry, I Won't Be Long, The Tale of Greypelt and the Thieves of Reggio. The rainy season sun had set quickly over Reggio, swiftly converting the gray day into a wet and gloomy night, typical of the Mediterranean rainy season. Most of the tavern's human patrons were away from the windows, engaged in chatter or the business of eating and drinking, but off in one corner, a lone panotti leaned against the window, looking out into the night expectantly. The little humanoid was unusual, but not enough to draw much attention in the crowded coastal city. Panotti look almost exactly like humans, except that they're noticeably smaller and have long, floppy ears that reach down to the waist. The little man felt no boredom as he waited, for his mind was racing, recounting the events of the day and exploring the possibilities of the future. It had all gone so well, but he still needed to stay on his guard. Thus it felt like very little time had passed when he finally spied a figure heading towards the tavern in the dark night. Shrouded in a long black cloak, the stranger was difficult to see in the poor light, but the monstrous beast of burden that Traveler kept as company was far more obvious. The second creature had a strange gait, not right for a horse, but it was too dark and far away to tell more about it. As he watched the shadowy figure tie up their beast and make their way to the door of the tavern, the panotti hoped this was finally the messenger he had been waiting for. When the new arrival walked out of view of the window to enter the tavern's entry hall, the panotti lost sight of his quarry, but he followed their progress thanks to his large and sensitive ears that could hear what humans couldn't. He heard the doorman offer to take the stranger's cloak and weapons, as was customary, but the stranger only uttered, "Don't worry, I won't be long," in truly terrible Latin. The panotti sensed a tremor in the doorman's voice as he tried to insist, explaining that weapons were not permitted in the tavern, that they had a perfectly secure vault where the weapons could be kept until the conclusion of their business. The stranger tapped on something the panotti couldn't see and repeated the phrase, "Don't worry, I won't be long," and apparently shoved the doorman out of the way and entered the main hall. The noise of the tavern slowly dimmed as its patrons each in turn noticed and stared at the black-cloaked newcomer. The stranger, for their part, seemed oblivious to the attention. The intruder walked nonchalantly into the center of the tavern, scanned the room in all directions, and then settled on the panotti in the corner and made a beeline for his window booth. The brief silence shifted into gossiping whispers and drunken remarks, as it was quite obvious that this stranger was not a human, but a cynocephalus. The cynocephali, or dog-heads, were a race of savages who lived on the outskirts of civilization, named for their distinctive canine features. The few who ever crossed paths with other races were merchants and mercenaries, who failed to fit in with either their own kind or the rest of the world. The cynocephali were exceptionally rare in this human-dominated land of Calabria, and steeped in legends and rumors, which the tavern patrons shared with each other in harsh tones. But as a non-human in a human land himself, the panotti guessed that these tales were mostly prejudicial fiction. He had seen a few dog-heads back in Theodosia, but never this closely. Now that he could examine this one so clearly, the strangeness of this stranger was striking. Upon reaching the panotti's booth, the traveler pulled back her hood and folded their cloak to the side, revealing a fit, feminine body. The creases of hard-earned muscles were quite visible beneath the coat of gray fur that covered her from head to foot. Her canine face was almost indistinguishable from a wild wolf's, except for a thoughtful spark behind her eyes and a head full of long, loose, silver hair. She wore next to nothing beneath the cloak, only a few rags to cover the most sensitive areas, and a series of straps and belts laden with pockets and pouches to keep whatever trinkets she collected in her travels. Her most apparent possession was a frightful-looking falchion dangling from her waist, allegedly the reason for the dispute with the doorman. She sat down opposite the panotti, and he took a second to take her in. He had heard rumors that cynocephalus females were quite fetching, and had always doubted it. But now that one of their wolfy women was right in front of him, their strange beauty was difficult to deny. She was not really attractive in any conventional way, but there was a sort of primal perfection and exotic novelty to her that defied any sense of traditional beauty standards. Andronikos Anatoli, the cynocephalus tried in an unfamiliar accent, and the panotti was awakened from his thoughts by the sound of his own name. Now it's time for business. If this all went well, there'd be plenty of opportunities to stare at beautiful women later. That's right, Andronikos answered. I take it Drudo sent you to discuss my price for the swan. He really does like to make a scene, but I'm not going to be. The wolf woman only furrowed her brow at the panotti's Latin response. She shook her palm to quiet the little man and asked, Do you remember your Greek? She could speak Greek much better than she could Latin, but it was obviously not her native language. I do, the panotti responded in the requested tongue, confused. Do you not speak Latin? How are you a negotiator for Drudo if you don't speak Latin? I don't know this Drudo, the cynocephalus answered dismissively. And my Latin was fine back in Genova. It's you Calabrians who can't speak it. Andronikos was quite sure it was the Genovese who couldn't speak Latin, but saw nothing to gain in arguing. If you're not with the guild, then who are you? How do you know me? I am here on behalf of Vasiclo of Theodosia to return you to your place of birth, to face punishment for your crime against him. Andronikos' eyes widened and his ears stiffened at the name of his hometown back in Crimea. Then, Theodosia? You've been sent from Theodosia? Are you insane? Do you have any idea what he means to do to me? I'll never go back. The doghead's deep and steady voice contrasted sharply with the panicked panotti's. I am not here to ask. I am here to take. Andronikos' mind raced. How had Vasiclo even found him all the way in Reggio? What could he do? Drudo wouldn't stand for one of his thieves being extradited by some Byzantine bounty hunter, and the real negotiator should still be on his way. All he had to do was stall, and the situation should solve itself. Wait, I have acquired something of great value here in Reggio, the thief explained. Whatever you are getting from this mission, I can give you more. I just need time to sell it. The canine across the table gave Andronikos a look of complete disgust. You have been sentenced to slavery for stealing in Theodosia, and you run all the way to Reggio just to make the same mistake. And you ask if I'm insane. The condemned criminal didn't answer out loud. Bah! It was all well and good for some battle-hungry, dog-headed Amazon to make her living hunting down prisoners and slaying outlaws, or whatever she did. How could a small-statured panotti even hope to live such a life? Andronikos was a thief. Thieving was what he was good at. It was the only way he'd ever amount to anything in this world, and it wasn't fair that the nobility and their lapdogs were always trying to lock him up or cut his hands off for using the talents the gods had given him. But no matter. The panotti's long ears had picked up another conversation across the tavern and realized that it just might save his skin. Andronikos had seen the cynocephalus's ears perk up and rotate towards the disturbance as well, but estimated that her limited knowledge of the local language had not fully informed her of the danger she was in. The doorman had reported the Amazon's armament to the tavern owner, who had in response rounded up some muscle from among the employees and patrons to confront the cynocephalus about it. Rumors of the race's martial prowess and inhuman strength had intimidated the posse at first, but the owner had finally convinced them. After all, she may be a doghead, but she was still a woman. Surely she couldn't be stronger than a strong human man, let alone a gang of them. The men had rallied, and now the bravest of them approached the window booth and its gray-pelted occupant. "Hey you, doghead! You can't have that weapon in here," the burly fellow barked, interrupting the non-human's conversation. His Latin words meant nothing to the foreigner. The accused cynocephalus only glared at the intruder coldly and waved him away. The look she gave him would normally have chilled the veins of any meager human, but this fellow had already worked himself up into a Calabrian fury to get this far and wasn't about to be calmed down. "That," he tried again, pointing at her abusive-looking falchion. "You can't have that in here. This is a place of peace." The wolf woman only tapped on her sword's peace straps, an extra buckle to prevent it from escaping its scabbard by accident, and coolly repeated her only Latin phrase. "Don't worry, I won't be long." Andronikos began to wonder if she understood a single word of it. "That doesn't matter. If you won't take off the sword, then get out." The angry tavern-goer pointed at the nearest exit, and several in the posse behind him chimed in, "Yeah, get out!" The cynocephalus only wondered what strange Calabrian custom she had violated. It didn't make sense for them to be so incensed at the sight of her sword. It was incredibly common for humans to carry swords, and it was silly to think that she was about to start swinging that long weapon in such a confined and crowded place. The dog had hated to give humans any sense of victory, as it only emboldened them, but there was no reason to remain. She had found Andronikos and Natalie, and could easily remove him by force. The wolf woman muttered something harsh in neither Greek nor Latin, and stood up to leave. The leader of the tavern posse made way to let her pass, and all seemed as though it would go smoothly, until the cynocephalus grabbed Andronikos sharply by the arm and tugged him along. "No, help!" the little thief cried out. "She means to abduct me!" The posse leader tried to intervene on Andronikos' behalf. When his words landed on deaf canine ears, he grabbed the cynocephalus to stop her. This was a terrible mistake. The human had barely noticed his opponent move before he felt his own bones snapping from a retaliatory arm lock. The grown man screamed in pain, and the cynocephalus threw him to the ground at the feet of his shocked companions. The wolfish warrior loosened her grip on Andronikos and stood her ground. She could read enough of human emotions to know that this would only get worse. The panotti, meanwhile, scrambled into the furthest corner of the window booth and scrunched himself into a ball to hide from the violence, instinctively wrapping himself in his floppy ears. The rest of the men looked back at the dog head in a frightened daze, worried that their fears of black magic and inhuman strength were true. One of the men finally rallied himself and charged at the offending foreigner. He grabbed a pewter tankard as an improvised weapon and raised it up to smash down on the woman's canine head. Luckily for his victim, the man had downed the intoxicating contents of his tankard before the mob had approached, and his swing was a bit off and a bit slow. With one hand, the wolf woman pushed his awkward attack away, and with the other delivered a devastating palm strike to the man's chin. As he staggered back, both canine hands turned their attention to his tankard, twisting it out of his loosened grip. With the weighty drinkware held over her fist like a brass knuckle, she reeled back and punched the dumbfounded man hard with his own weapon. He put up his arms to block the blow, but it still knocked him off balance, and the dog-headed Amazon followed up with a fierce uppercut that snuck beneath his guard and knocked him out cold. 2 dents appeared in the tankard where it had twice connected. The cynocephalus contemplated her situation for a moment as the next human weighed his chances. She could easily silence these jesters if she drew her dirk, but she wasn't sure if it was against the rules. Strange savage though she was, the professional bounty hunter believed in rules and hadn't meant to break them. Was it only long weapons like the falchion that were not allowed, or any dedicated weapons? Apparently the tankard was allowed, but it was far less deadly than a dagger. The point of this rule must not be to discourage violence, since the tavern's proprietor had instigated the encounter. Perhaps it was to encourage the patrons to think creatively when it came to violence. Relying on a fine weapon can end in hubris, after all, so the cynocephalus could see the value of the human's exercise. In the end, she decided to follow along and enjoy the game. Besides, no self-respecting doghead should need a blade to fend off a troop of drunken, hairless apes. The next human challenger gave himself a running start and tried to tackle the cynocephalus. With impossible speed, she stepped forward to meet him and planted the dented tankard firmly into his throat. He flung his arms around her limply as he gasped for breath, and before he could regain his strength, the canine combatant cupped her other palm around the back of his neck, spun around and slammed his skull into the corner of the table behind her. While this was going on, the tavern owner had barked some suggestions to the remaining posse patrons, and 2 of them now approached the cynocephalus with a broom and a fire poker. The wolf-woman wondered if this wasn't bending the weaponless rule a bit far, but she was in no place to judge, and if the point of the exercise was to encourage better decision-making, they were indeed better choices than the tankard. She concluded that the fire poker was the more dangerous option and should be dealt with first. Luckily, fear had soaked into the hearts of the Calabrians. They only waved their improvised armaments threateningly, missing the opportunity to put their enemy on the defensive. The wolf-woman raised her thrice-scarred tankard courageously, and the men's spirits only weakened further. She bolted to the far side of the poker wielder, and he only lifted his weapon up to defend himself while the broom-bearer swung at air. The bristly staff had swung slower, and the gray devil had moved faster than its owner had anticipated. With a well-timed swing, the canine combatant struck the tip of the fire poker with her drinkware as its wielder tried to bring it forward for a counterattack. As she predicted, the hard iron of the poker bit into the soft pewter. With a twist, the cup snagged around the metal hook, muzzling the weapon's dangerous tip. The cynocephalus put her free hand on the poker and, with the strength of both arms, yanked it free from the human. He resisted, and the braver broom-bearer attempted to take the opportunity to strike again, but the wise wolf kept the fire poker's human between them as a buffer. Sensing that she lacked the leverage to simply wrench the poker away from the panicked patron, the cynocephalus changed tactics. The sly canine suddenly switched from pulling to pushing, and shoved the poker wielder into the broom-bearer. They were both caught by surprise and fell to the ground in a pile with the poker wielder on top. The toppled tavern-goer managed to keep his hands on his weapons, but now the cynocephalus planted her foot upon his neck. Forced to choose between holding onto the fire poker or trying to force his foe's foot off of his air supply, he selected life-giving breath, and his opponent managed to wrestle away the metal rod. With undisputed possession of the fire poker, the confused canine stopped to think again. She had never understood the rules of this no-weapons mob fight, and wasn't sure how acceptable it would be to kill off her opponents. If this exercise was meant to be a learning experience, then killing off the students would contradict its concept. The fire poker was certainly capable of deadly force, but the one who had used it hadn't been very aggressive with it. Maybe the human had never planned to use its full force. After all, if they had attacked with the fire poker thinking that they could use deadly force but she couldn't, that would be very unfair. But of course, that would be absolutely typical of one of these hairless apes, wouldn't it? With deep disgust for the human race burning inside of her, the dog-headed Amazon glared coldly at the two patrons piled on the ground, the same icy stare that should have warned the first of them that yelling at a cynocephalus was a terrible idea. This time the two men understood the violent promise written in her eyes. No word of any language was needed to translate the deadly sentiment. The defeated posse scrambled across the floor on all fours to escape, not daring to take the time to lift themselves to their feet until they were clear across the broom. The dog-headed Amazon then walked slowly towards the tavern's owner. He was not an unfit man, but not the specimen of youth that his posse was either. As the gray-furred fighter stalked forward with grim determination, he lost his nerve. The terrified man whimpered and begged forgiveness from her and from his gods, but the only answer to his blubbering prayer was, "Don't worry, I won't be long." Behind her, Andronikos feared for his own life just as deeply. He had expected this wandering rogue to be soundly defeated and thrown out by the strapping young men who had confronted her. He had expected this would just become a funny story to tell Drudo's messenger when he finally arrived. He had expected the legends of cynocephalid martial prowess to be ignorant hearsay, but what his own eyes had just witnessed put the wildest rumors to shame. The little criminal had believed that Drudo and his thief guild would make a tragic example out of this troublemaker, but now he had lost all faith that they had the power to protect him or themselves. Nothing in this world could save him from that gray devil. When the indomitable doghead turned her attention to the tavern keeper, Andronikos saw it as his final opportunity for freedom, and bolted for the door. Cynocephalid hearing is almost as sharp as the long-eared panottis. The sound of her quarry's escape snapped the bounty hunter to attention. She barked a curse in her native tongue, annoyed with herself for getting so caught up in the human's game, but estimated that she still had time for an abbreviated vengeance on her way out. Before racing after her prey, she hurled the heavy fire poker at the tavern owner, who had advocated its use. Propelled with inhuman force, the spinning missile struck its target hard and knocked him out cold in the middle of another hasty prayer to the relevant deities. The doorman had returned to his post at the tavern entryway, and the gray stranger paid him for his service with an elbow to the chin as she rushed after the fleeing panotti. She wasn't exactly sure how he was involved in this brawl, but felt certain that he had earned his punishment. Andronikos made it outside of the tavern with quite the head start. He knew he'd never escape the muscle-bound hound in a straight dash, but in the dark and rainy night he could lose the unfamiliar foreigner in Reggio's twisting streets. If the doghead had a dog's nose, she might be able to track him by scent on a clear day, but tonight the rain would wash the trail away. As he entertained these dreams of success, the panotti heard the cynocephalus barge out of the tavern behind him and shout in Arabic. The command was meaningless to Andronikos. He wondered at first if she had defaulted to a more familiar tongue in the moment of crisis, but quickly realized that the words were not meant for him. A strange black shape squirmed in the murky night, and a pair of nocturnal eyes flashed as they reflected the lamplight from the tavern. The creature charged into his path with cat-like grace despite its colossal size, and let loose a menacing baritone hiss. Andronikos tried to stop in his tracks and tripped to the ground on the wet cobblestones. He stared into the mass of scales, fangs, horns, and claws that towered over him, utterly stunned. The panotti knew no name for this beast, only that it must be some antediluvian titan from beyond the frontiers of civilization. Creatures like this were relics of the ancient world that existed before the gods paved the way for their own creations, having survived in the shadowy cracks and crevices of the world that had been overlooked by heaven's cleansing reconstruction. The cynocephalus quickly caught up to the awestruck criminal and calmly commanded the creature again in Arabic. This time Andronikos recognized the phrase. "Latifa, down!" He had heard the local Saracens give the same command to their dogs. Latifa must be the name of the creature, a common name for pets among the Saracens, which meant cutie. "The price for retrieving you is best if you are kept in one piece," the cynocephalus explained, "but multiple pieces is also acceptable." The panotti's keen ears heard a distinctive ruffling of belts against metal, which he took to be the sound of her releasing the peace straps on her falchion. "I surrender," the dazed Andronikos conceded. The wolf woman kept one hand on her weapon, and with the other grabbed her prey firmly by the arm. She dragged him, almost flung him, to the wagon that had been hitched to her strange beast. From her supplies she produced a length of rope and started binding the panotti's hands and feet. "You know my name. What do I call you?" Andronikos asked as the cynocephalus went about her work. "Greypelt," she answered gruffly. The panotti wondered at the bleak response. It was not a name so much as a description, translated into his own Greek instead of given in her native tongue. No surname or title followed. To the thief's knowledge, it was not uncommon for cynocephaly to have gray fur. The designation was almost anonymous, as though she answered, "I have no name." Greypelt finished her restraints while the dazed panotti puzzled over her origins. These were strong bonds, too strong to wriggle out of as he had done to escape Vasiclo so many years before. With inhuman strength, the cynocephalus roughly picked up her prisoner and tossed him into her cart. She pulled an oiled tarp over the vehicle to keep the rain off of her belongings and prisoner, and before long Andronikos sensed the motion of the wagon departing. The canine kidnapper had done nothing to thwart his hearing, so the thief tried to listen for signs of where they were going, hoping for a chance to break free and escape back to Drudo. Thank you for joining me, dear reader. If you'd like to help me out, you can press the like button. Let me know what's on your mind in the comments. And you can buy my books on Amazon. Link in the description. And with any luck, we'll all meet again.